Invincible Season 4, Episode 4 is officially here, so let's just get right into it, because today we're talking Invincible Season 4, Episode 4, breakdown and review. But before we get to anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, Invincible Season 4, Episode 4. This is a completely original story. Robert Kirkman himself confirmed this was a story he initially wanted to tell when he was creating the Invincible comics, however, he just never got around to it, and then by the time he wanted to implement it, there was no room left to tell this story. So thanks to the success of the animated series, he got to create an original story that he wanted in the comics. Now, this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. However, to me, the most interesting thing about this is that we will be getting multiple original stories to the animated series, and that has been confirmed by Robert Kirkman. But all that being said, let's get into the episode. So this episode is essentially Mark traveling to the Underworld and having to help Damien Darkblood and Satan to stop a villain called Volcanica, and she is trying to release these things called vials and also her magma creatures, not only upon the Underworld, but eventually against the entire world, and this is definitely going to prompt Mark into action. However, when we pick up with Mark, he is in an incredibly vulnerable state, especially after the events of the first 3 episodes of this season. He killed Russ Livingston, and not only that, he almost killed Dinosaurus after he transformed back into his human form. And to top it all off, he nearly killed Titan, and he even states that if it hadn't been for Oliver, he probably would have followed through with it. Now, was it justified, and did Titan deserve it after everything Titan has put Mark through? Possibly. However, Mark is a hero, so just killing someone like that definitely wouldn't have been justified, especially by other heroes in the universe. And this is something that Mark really struggled with throughout this entire episode, and that brings me to probably one of my favorite parts of the episode, and it's something we got in the very first 5 minutes, and that's Mark just simply talking to Art. Art has definitely become one of my favorite characters in this series, because although he is just a tailor creating costumes for superheroes, he's also an emotional support person, not just for Omniman and not just for Debbie, but also for Mark. Mark has confided in him for multiple things throughout the seasons, even things as simple as his relationship with Amber. However, in this moment, he goes to Art and he says he's not worthy of the suit he made him. He isn't a hero anymore. And even worse than that, he's becoming like his father. And it's in this moment that we get one of my favorite things from Art in the entire show, and that is his constant reassurance that Invincible is a hero. And not only is he a hero, he is a different person than who his father was. You see, Art had a very interesting relationship with Omni-Man. Although he found out eventually what Omni-Man had done, they had built up a very close friendship, to the point where Art on several occasions has even stated that Omni-Man at heart was good, at least in some ways. However, in this moment, Art doesn't try to draw comparisons in a positive way between Omni-Man and Mark. Instead, he highlights how Mark is genuinely a good person. And one of the biggest reasons for that is this very conversation. You see, this isn't a conversation he and Nolan ever had. There was never any type of situation that had ramifications that led Nolan to go to Art for any type of support. He never doubted what he did. However, Invincible in this moment, like a lot of moments in this series, is doubting himself. He's doubting whether or not he's a hero, and he's regretting all of the times he's had to take a life or he's considered taking a life. And Art points out that this very thing is what makes him different than Omni-Man, because Omni-Man never considered any of this. Omni-Man didn't have the hesitations that Mark is having in this moment. Now, another thing I really enjoyed about this moment was Invincible getting his iconic suit back. I really love the yellow. Although I have enjoyed the blue and black suit, I do really like how flashy the yellow looks and how much it does pop off screen. But before he is able to go back to his original suit, he does get a call, being summoned somewhere else, and that is where we transition and we go to the Underworld. We see Damien Darkblood amongst other demons trying to fight this villain known as Volcanica, and it is a very perilous effort as we see them get completely murked. And I will just say, some of these deaths were some of the most brutal we've seen in the series, specifically where Damien Darkblood's sister got literally filled up with lava and magma from the inside and just exploded. And while yes, she does survive this, I think that actually makes it even more brutal, because literally less than half of her skull remains drained and she was still conscious. I cannot even imagine the amount of pain that she went through and continue to go through because she is quite literally alive the whole time. And she does eventually get entirely healed, but even that looked pretty painful because she was only partially healed. So that led me to believe we were in for a pretty crazy episode and in for some pretty awesome fights. However, I was definitely wrong about that, and this is where I'm going to get slightly more negative about the episode. I felt like it was definitely lacking in a lot of areas, specifically in the fighting. Now, when it comes to demon versus demon battles, we got some pretty cool fights. Damien Darkblood and his sister, alongside some other demons going up against Volcanica, as I mentioned, was a pretty cool fight. It ended in a pretty brutal fashion. However, Invincible, once he's introduced into this story, doesn't realistically have any meaningful fights. We do see when they do go to retrieve the crown, he does go to fight against Cerberus. However, in this moment, he throws Damien Darkblood up out of the way, and the entire fight concludes before Damien Darkblood comes back down, and Mark simply catches him, has the crown, and leaves. To me, this felt like an obvious way to save money on animation, and although on this channel I haven't really critiqued Invincible's animation or their budget for animation in the past, this is a moment that I am going to critique, because to me, I would prefer PNG images sliding across the screen or some subpar animation to just totally skipping it altogether. And to me, that is what it felt like they did in this moment. Even when they're falling down that cavern to go get the crown, it felt very cheap to me. They were just floating down having a conversation, and it felt like these moments kept happening in this episode simply to save money down the line. And although I understand some of the epic fights that we are going to get later on in this season, especially when they encounter Thrag, is going to take an insane amount of budget, to me that doesn't justify taking away this much of the budget from this episode. I feel like this was a wasted episode in a lot of ways. The story to me wasn't compelling. The big bad villain wasn't compelling at all. She was very one-dimensional. And perhaps worse than that, Mark quite literally one-shotted her at the end. And yes, she kept regenerating. However, he then kept one-shotting her over and over again until she just disintegrated back into the magma. And yes, this does mean that she will eventually return. However, it did definitely feel very anticlimactic, because why couldn't Invincible just go up to her at the very beginning and take her down? There was such an emphasis on going to retrieve this crown to restore Satan's power to what it used to be so that he could restore the Underworld. However, even after this happens, he is defeated. Damien Darkblood is defeated. The rest of the demons are defeated. And once Mark sees all of this happen, he stops what he is doing, which is literally just fighting off different henchmen made of molten rock and magma, and goes to defeat her. And as I mentioned, he quite literally one-shotted her multiple times, showing that he had the ability to defeat her with relative ease. He even makes a comment that he did no damage to his costume, something that almost never happens. He always has some type of tear or his goggles getting broken. But in this moment, even he pointed out how easy this was. Now, moments later, he does get attacked by the vial, and his costume does take damage in this moment. However, once again, Mark is able to one-shot this enemy, and they are able to stop all of it relatively easily. So it led to a lot of anticlimactic moments, and to me, I thought this episode, when we originally heard about it, was going to be the forces of hell trying to invade Earth, and Mark was going to have to stop all of them. But that wasn't the case at all. To me, everything as far as action in this episode felt very pointless and felt very anticlimactic, which was really disappointing because I myself really enjoy Invincible's fights. I know a lot of people, as I mentioned before, critique the animation, whereas I personally have enjoyed every single action sequence we've gotten from Invincible. Even if it's not the best animation I've ever seen, I still really enjoy it. However, to me, it felt like with this episode, they just kind of stopped trying. That moment in the cavern where they go to retrieve the crown is probably the best example of this. To me, this episode wasn't really about epic moments or an epic storyline. It was more so about Mark growing as a person and growing as a hero. And some of that was in the very beginning with Art. However, he also has some growth as a person when he meets Damien Darkblood, because Damien Darkblood was just trying to summon Omniman. However, because Mark is quite literally Omniman's son, it was close enough for him to be summoned to the Underworld. And this was a pretty pivotal moment for Mark, because it's pointing out that Mark is is very similar to Omni-Man. However, one of the most important things that we get from this episode is Damien Darkblood multiple times stating how much different Invincible is to Omni-Man, how many times they had conversations and how many times they fought alongside each other. And Omni-Man never doubted himself. Omni-Man never hesitated. He didn't have the hesitations or the doubts within himself that Mark is showing this entire episode. And he didn't have the care for people that Mark is continuing to show in these moments. And this is something that Damien Darkblood actually points out a couple of times, and it definitely helps to show Mark that he is at least a little bit different than Omni-Man. And although he is changing and becoming darker, there is still good in him. Some of the other interactions that I did actually enjoy from the Underworld sequence was when they were falling, although it did seem kind of cheap. The humor in this moment was actually really funny. When I saw the promos for it, I thought it was going to be somewhat stupid. It seemed a little repetitive. However, similar to the moment where Omni-Man had to listen to Alan and his fiance going at it at night when he was trying to sleep, this moment felt hilarious. The entire sequence where he kept putting his helmet on and then taking it off just to talk was really, really funny, and I have no idea why it was so funny. It just felt really ridiculous, especially considering the entire fate of the Underworld was quite literally on the line, and in this moment they're talking about the functions of a helmet. It just felt really ridiculous to the point where it was actually funny, so these jokes definitely landed for me. However, that's pretty much everything I have to say about the actual Hell storyline that we did get. We got some other revelations as well. Debbie will be selling the house and her and Paul will be moving in together. Mark and Oliver first are pretty hesitant about this, with Oliver quite literally stating that Paul is boring, and then when Debbie snaps back at him, he says, well, I like him, he's just boring. But then the mood quickly shifts, with Mark stating that he's happy for her, and if it's going to make her happy, he wants her to do it. And then Oliver flies up and says he is excited about picking his room, and his room is being picked first. So this was just bonding the family a little bit more together. And to me, these are the moments that I really enjoy from the show. I love the emotional weighted moments, the family connections, and that's what really carried this episode for me. I also really enjoyed Adam, Eve, and William talking. She needed someone to confide in about her being pregnant, as she was hiding it from Mark up to this point. And that's something that William actually pointed out, although he congratulates her and says he's happy for her, and she confesses to him that she's not ready to have a kid and that eventually she thought she wanted to have a kid. However, right in this moment, she doesn't want to do it. And this is where William mentions she needs to tell Mark because it is something that's very important and that they need to discuss together. And that's where we do pick up with Mark. He and Eve have that little chat on the roof. Very sentimental, heartfelt moment where Eve just simply asks if he's okay. And Mark very honestly says no, he's not, but he's getting there, which is showing how much he is growing as a person and as a character. He is working through things. And right in this moment, Eve is about to tell Mark what is going on with her and the fact that she is pregnant with their child. However, before she can say anything, they look up in the sky and they see Omni-Man and Alan. And that is where the episode concludes, with Omni-Man stating ominously that it is time for war and that Mark is needed. And this is going to set up the Viltrumite War. The latter half of this season is definitely going to be jam-packed, full of epic fights, epic moments, and epic character interactions. And I, for one, cannot wait, specifically for the next episode, because we're finally getting a reunion between Debbie and Omni-Man. We're getting a reunion between Omni-Man and Mark, because Mark quite literally thought that Omni-Man had been killed by this point. He even states that earlier in this episode, that Omni-Man is either dead or very likely dead. So the fact that he is there right in front of him is going to lead to some emotional moments. And then when you tie that into the fact that Debbie is going to be seeing Omni-Man for the first time since he left after calling her a pet, we are in for some very emotional moments. I personally am also really curious to see how Eve reacts to the whole situation, because although she never really had any interactions with Omni-Man, Mark is quite literally the person she loves more than anything. And she was there watching as Omni-Man was quite literally beating the brakes off of him to the point where all of his teeth fell out. In fact, all of the Guardians were there watching on a screen as Invincible was trying to battle Omni-Man. So it's just going to be really interesting to see all the different characters' reactions to Omni-Man's return. I have no doubt Cecil will likely make an appearance, as he has shown that he has the Graysons under some type of surveillance. And even if he didn't, the fact that Omni-Man and Alan quite literally entered the atmosphere would probably lead Cecil to, at the very least, investigate and if he does any investigating at all, he would see it is Omni-Man returning. So I cannot wait to see not only his reaction to this, but how he interacts with Omni-Man when he does see him again. So all in all, I'm extremely excited for the next episode and for the rest of this season. But if I'm being honest, this episode is without a doubt the worst of the season so far. It was, for the most part, pretty boring, felt very anticlimactic, and the best parts of it were just the character interactions that we did get and a little bit of growth that we did get for Invincible as a hero. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. Did you all enjoy this episode, or did you feel it was kind of anticlimactic? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.